This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning. Can I welcome members and officers here at City Hall and the public in the gallery or watching on the webcast to today's meeting of the GLA Oversight Committee. Please may I remind participants to turn your phones off or put them on silent, and can I also ask members to ensure electronic devices are not in front of their microphones. Can I ask the clerk, Nicoletta Kemp, to confirm any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Assembly Member McCartney, for who Assembly Member Clark will be substituting, and also from Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Nicoletta. Declarations of interest. Can we note the list of offices held by Assembly members?
Noted.
Thank you. Can I also ask members if they have any disclosable pecuniary interests in specific items listed on the agenda? Thanks. Minutes of the last meeting. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting of the GLA Oversight Committee on the 23rd of October 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
And can we also confirm the meeting of the Elections Review Working Group on the 16th of October 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we note the completed, closed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the GLA Oversight Committee?
Agreed.
Thank you. And just to let the guests know, we've got a couple of items. We will be coming to you. We're very grateful for your patience. The Secretariat Quarterly Report. Can we note the Secretariat Quarterly Report for the period August to October 2024 as set out in Appendix 1? Thank you. And can we also note the 24-25 Quarter 2 budget position and forecasts as set out in Appendix 1? Thank you. Can we note the committee's work programme for 24-25? Brilliant, thank you. And with that, we're on to our main bit of business for today. So I'd like to welcome officers from GLA and TfL to the Chamber to talk about cyber security. Deanne Tranmer, Executive Director for Corporate Resources and Business Improvement from the GLA, Shashi Verma, Chief Technology Officer from TfL, and Jules Gascoigne, Chief Information Security Officer from TfL. Thank you very much for joining us in the Chamber. I'd like to open up, perhaps Deanne, starting with you, and ask, how would you describe the current cyber threat landscape for public institutions like the GLA at present?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Assembly members. Thank you for inviting us here today to discuss cyber security. As the Chair has pointed out, my name is Deanne Tranmer. I'm the Executive Director for Corporate Resources and Business Improvement, and I started work with the GLA in July this year. I'm also the Senior Information Risk Owner. The digital and the technical teams report to me, and cybersecurity is one of my responsibilities. Over the years, the public sector has moved to become digital by default. This has brought massive benefits in terms of speed, efficiencies, data-driven decision-making and data sharing, let alone the environmental benefits of not using paper for every transaction. But it has also resulted in an increase in cybercrime. If you think of applying for a driving licence or a passport now versus having to send in paper applications, it's fairly quick. You can get the user data that is already on there, and it's a very swift process. However, conversely, very few bank robbers go into a branch now. Criminals are much more likely to try and hack into the bank systems, so cybercrime is absolutely on the increase as other crimes are dropping. Public sector organisations are particularly vulnerable to cyber threats due to a combination of factors, including resource constraints, the challenge of keeping technology up to date, and the ever-evolving sophistication of cyber criminals means that we can never be complacent. The amount of personal and financial data that public sector organisations hold, together with the services that we provide, make us high-value targets for cyber criminals. Cyber attacks have become increasingly sophisticated, with attackers employing various methods such as ransomware and malware. Phishing attacks remain a huge issue as cyber criminals use tactics such as cleverly disguised emails to exploit human error, gaining unauthorised access to sensitive systems. Why is the public sector such a prime target for cyber attacks? because it holds vast quantities of sensitive data, from personal identification records to critical national infrastructure systems. A breach can have devastating consequences, including compromising citizen trust, disrupting essential services, and even endangering national security. You also have to consider the devastating effect on the individuals whose data we hold. Cyber attacks don't just target public sector organisations, they can target any organisation at any time. And we've really recently seen examples of high-profile companies and institutions from across all areas being affected, including my very near neighbour here, TfL. Cyber attacks on the GLA take place daily, but they're recognised and stopped by automated firewalls and systems. It's increasingly a case of not if, but when an incident will hit. I've talked about the technical challenges, but the greater one is cultural. A culture of limited cyber awareness and inconsistent cybersecurity practices across teams creates risk. But a culture where everyone is cyber aware and takes ownership is one of the greatest defences against cybercrime. We learn from every cyber incident. Recent large-scale cyber attacks have underlined some critical lessons. For example, the British Library highlighted the importance of updating legacy systems and having robust incident response plans. Similarly, the incidents which disrupted NHS services demonstrated the risks posed by third-party suppliers, emphasising the need for comprehensive supply chain security. The Government Bill on Cybersecurity and Resilience responds to this issue, as does the National Cybersecurity Centre's Active Cyber Defence Programme. But the overarching lesson is that cyber threats continue to evolve and change, and our approach to mitigating them needs to do the same. To address these challenges, the public sector needs to invest in modernising its infrastructure, fostering a culture of cyber awareness and collaborating with public and private sector experts to share knowledge and resources. We also need to prioritise policies that mandate robust cyber security standards while balancing privacy and innovation. Cyber threats can take many forms, which is why they need a multi-layered approach to counter them. The first for us is technical defences, surrounding your digital infrastructure with modern and responsive IT systems. These are the tools, systems, firewalls and software we put around our infrastructure to stop incidents before they start. 2, best practices for industry standards for security approaches, such as implementing two-factor authentication and having a dedicated roles responsible for cybersecurity. Thirdly, developing organisational knowledge, building a strong cybersecurity culture where cyber resilience is viewed as everyone's responsibility, and continuous training and vigilance are prioritised. This is essential for ensuring that technical investments are fully effective. This is underpinned by regular information governance training, which raises awareness for staff on data protection, UK GDPR, information security and records management. The human factor cannot be ignored. Employees, contractors and even trusted partners can inadvertently become entry points for cyber attacks, often through phishing schemes or weak passwords. In a sector where awareness and training are often underfunded, this risk becomes ever more pronounced. This is an ever-changing environment, and if you stand still, you lose ground. We must remain proactive in this space, which is why we continue to review, evaluate and invest in our cybersecurity. Thank you. My parting point is what was good yesterday is not good enough for tomorrow.
Thanks, Deanne. Jules or Shashi? Shashi, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. We are very happy to join you and look forward to answering your questions. I'm joined by Jules Gascoigne, who's our Chief Information Security Officer. Cybersecurity is a challenge for all organizations, but particularly for those in the public sector. I'm sure we will discuss this in more detail in the session. But while technical challenges remain significant, many experts suggest its cultural barriers often hinder effective cybersecurity strategies within the public sector. Technically, organizations face issues such as outdated infrastructure, limited integration of advanced technologies, and constrained budgets. However, A culture of limited cyber awareness and inconsistent cybersecurity practices can often have an even more significant impact, as this leaves organizations vulnerable to phishing and social engineering attacks. Cybersecurity at Transport for London is led by our central cybersecurity team in our Technology and Data Directorate, which reports to me. Jules leads the cybersecurity team. We use a mixture of protective, detective, response, and recovery controls across people, process, and technology. Our cybersecurity strategy, last refreshed in 2023, defines TfL's vision for cybersecurity, which is delivered through an ongoing funded cybersecurity program. We work with expert partners, including the National Cybersecurity Center, to understand the threat and vulnerability landscape and better understand risks. I wanted to reserve most of my opening statement to update members on the recent cyber attack. However, before this, I wanted to remind the committee that because of the ongoing criminal investigation underway led by the National Crime Agency, we are significantly limited in what we can say at this time. There will be some information that we are not able to share and questions that we may not be able to answer in either the public or private sessions of this meeting at this stage. We will, of course, endeavor to answer all questions that we are able to, but we will not be able to give any information that may put TfL system staff or customers at risk, or that is directly linked to the ongoing criminal investigation led by the National Crime Agency. We take very seriously the threat of cybersecurity and prioritize the security of our network and customer data, continually monitoring our systems to ensure only those authorized can gain access. It is worth emphasizing that because we are responsible for critical national infrastructure, part of the National Cybersecurity Center's role is to work very closely with us to monitor this for this sort of activity, and we work with them on a routine basis. With support from the National Cybersecurity Center and the National Crime Agency, we identified some suspicious activity on 1 September and took action to limit access, ensuring all safety critical systems and processes were maintained. We are continuing to work with partners to conduct a thorough investigation into this incident. We have worked closely with the National Crime Agency and the National Cybersecurity Center throughout this process and have also notified the Information Commissioner's Office, with whom we remain in touch throughout. Our investigations identified that certain customer data had been accessed. This includes some customer names and contact details, including email addresses and home addresses were provided, and in some cases, Oyster card refund data. We contacted around 5,000 customers who were affected as a precautionary measure to offer them support and guidance. I would like later on to provide some context behind this 5,000, because 5,000 sounds like a large number, but in the context of what we deal with, it's a very, very small number. Now, I'm not trying to belittle the fact that some people are affected, but I do want to put some context around it. As part of the measures implemented to deal with the incident, we took the difficult but essential decision to temporarily pause new concession photocard applications while we undertook important security checks and ensured systems were recovered in a way that reduced the risk of further attack. While work continues to restore services, we have now safely brought back online our concession photocard website and begun to start processing new applications. We are working to process all applications as quickly as possible and have already processed and dispatched more than 30,000 18-plus student Oyster photocards, more than 10,000 60-plus London Oyster photocards, and nearly 600 apprentice photocards since the applications reopened. Once new photocards have been applied for, where possible, credit remaining unexpired ZIP photocards can be transferred across to new photocards by contacting our customer services team. Customers are also advised to keep a record of any fares that they should be refunded. We're beginning to work through our refunds for some of our customers and are working in a priority order, starting with the oldest cases first. We're also beginning to process refunds for some of our customers and are working in a priority order, starting with the oldest cases. We are identifying cases from vulnerable customers and those citing hardship and/or high-value refunds so that we can resolve those as quickly as possible. Once new photocards have been issued, we will provide information on how customers can apply for refunds for any additional travel costs incurred due to not being able to apply for a photocard. In addition, the security measures we have been taking mean that it was not possible for us to deliver the necessary system changes to enable 47 additional stations outside London to benefit from pay-as-you-go with contactless from the 22nd of September as previously planned. We are working with the Department for Transport and the Rail Delivery Group to reschedule this rollout, and we apologize for this delay. If customers are contacted by someone claiming to have their data, they should contact Action Fraud, the UK's National Reporting Centre for Fraud and Cybercrime. The National Cybersecurity Center has further guidance for individuals and families on data. As mentioned earlier, I would like to reiterate that this is an ongoing cybersecurity incident on which we are working with the relevant government agencies. The latest information on the incident can be found on our website, where we are providing regular and timely updates to our valued customers. We are sorry for the inconvenience this incident may continue to cause to our customers, and we would like to thank them for our patience. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, both of you. Deanne, if I could come back to you quickly. One of the things you said in your opening statement was around the nature of the fact that these cyber attacks come in every day. I wondered, obviously, since the war started in Ukraine, there's been a 300% increase in NATO countries of cyber incidents and cyber attacks. Is that something that the GLA faces, or is that something that's reserved more for national government?
So I think cyber incidents are generally on the increase, but actually those sort of events do increase the traffic and increase us as a target. So yes, we are noticing increased volumes of attacks that are coming through. I think that there are those external events that do affect it, but there is no doubt an increase in the number of attacks that public sector organisations generally are facing, and that is these external events are part of the cause of that.
And how do you see the threat to public organisations versus perhaps private organisations? And as well, is there a hierarchy between local, regional and national government? Are these threats different, and perhaps which environments are more secure or more at risk?
So I think that we were just talking about this earlier. All organisations are targets of cyber attacks. Where the public sector has challenges is often it's got to struggle with getting investment to update its systems. It is often then seen as more vulnerable in that particular area. It's also rich in terms of the data that it actually holds. So actually it is a prime area for target because it is holding personal sensitive data. So I don't think that necessarily that the volume of attacks are less on private sector organisations. They are the same as public sector organisations. But in public sector organisations, investment in its defences may be less than what a private organisation can do.
Thanks. Shashi or Jules, do you want to add anything?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the volume of cyber attacks is increasing for a variety of reasons. I mean, Ukraine is only one factor in that. It's a very lucrative area for cybercrime, and organized criminal groups are prolific in that activity. It's not just a case of public sector. They will go after anything on which they can find something useful, whether that's money or data or just disruption. Sometimes they do it for the thrills of doing it. And in general, every organization has to be more cyber aware and more responsive to the fact that this world is changing. The challenge is acute in the public sector for the reasons that Diane has just laid out, which is one, that we hold critical information, and two, the disruption that you can cause by disrupting organizations such as TfL, but many others. You know, the NHS is a very frequent target of attacks for exactly the same reasons. They make us very attractive targets. And that's even more reason why there has to be proper investment in cybersecurity.
I think both of you mentioned words to the effect of staying ahead of the curve in your statements. When you look perhaps nationally at regional transport and government bodies, or nationally at the same sort of organisations, where do you see us in London on that curve? Are we ahead of it? Do we need to, where do we sit in terms of what other people are doing? Do we have a weakness beyond others, or are we in a good position? Well, or better, I should say.
It's a very difficult judgment to make because we don't know what other people are doing. You know, we have some information on what other people are doing, but we don't know everything that everyone's doing. I have to say that there is a fairly high degree of sophistication in the way that we have dealt with cybersecurity over the years. And despite the fact that this attack makes it look like we were vulnerable, every organization is vulnerable. It's just a question of who gets on the radar of cyber criminals or potential hackers. This is where the work that we do with the NCSC is so critical, because they are the people who get to see all organizations and can do some comparisons across the board. Jules works with them all the time, both before the incident and after the incident. And we have had joint sessions with the NCSC, including our senior exec, after the incident, where they have given us their view of our cybersecurity and how we dealt with it. I think they are on record publicly as saying that we dealt with the incident really well. Now, that's not an easy accolade to come by. I mean, it's very, very rare for the NCSC or the NCA to issue a public commendation of that kind, but they have done that in our case. I don't say that to be complacent. I just say that because there is a degree of diligence that we apply to the way we deal with this. But despite that diligence, as this incident shows, everybody is vulnerable.
Thanks, Shashi. And to come to that, you know, your answer in the first sentence was, we don't really know where we compare because there's not really that collaboration or conversation. It's something we heard heavily in our first meeting, that organisations obviously are not willing really to come up and say, this is the concerns, these are the things we've dealt with. Should there be more of that? I mean, is there more ways we can learn more from other public institutions or private businesses that have had large-scale attacks, say the British Library, as I think Deanne mentioned?
Can I just clarify what I said earlier? It's not that there's no cooperation. There is actually a lot of cooperation, and I want to bring Jules in because he's the one who's doing this cooperation. We do talk to other organizations. We are part of many information exchanges. There are information exchange mechanisms set up between organizations. We are part of that. The NCSC is the coordinating body behind all of this, and we work with them as well. But there is a level of, the question that you asked is, how do we compare with other organizations? That requires us to do an assessment of the way we conduct cybersecurity versus other organizations. And there's a limit to how much any organization will share about what they're doing. So there is a lot of cooperation.
Yes,
but
sorry,
I can't answer your question specifically.
I mean specifically on what we're doing versus what other people are doing. Should there be more cooperation? Should there be more conversation around or sharing about safeguards that institutions are using?
Could I ask Jules to come in because he's very directly in the line of this one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for inviting me along. So the short answer, I suppose, is yes, there should be more collaboration. It's always better to share more information about controls that people are finding effective or the incidents that organisations are suffering. Over my time in the industry, the collaboration has improved, but there's still a long way to go. Earlier in my career, I found that organisations were extremely cagey about how they were operating and the incidents that they've been through. That's less the case now, but it is still the case to some extent, like Shashi's describing. And that's because organisations don't want to reveal too much information that might put themselves or their customers at risk, or that might put them at risk of sharing information that they're unable to share because of the source of that information, perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. There was an introduction earlier where you mentioned human error, and so I want to talk more about the barriers to cybersecurity, and particularly on the cultural barriers. And you talked about the fact that limited awareness and the need to be is a problem, and the need to be cyber aware is one of the defences. Having experts sharing knowledge and resources, having cyber resilience, training and investment, and that investment is key. So would you say that right now the GLA and TfL cybersecurity culture is doing that investment right now? What's the culture? What does it look like in terms of the issues that you were just alluding to at the beginning? So I'll go to Diane and then Sashi there.
So I will say we can always improve. There is never an area that you can't improve knowledge and awareness. We do have mandatory training. All of our new staff are trained in cyber awareness. I myself, when I was inducted, went through the cyber awareness training. We've gone through regular training for all. So we went through a process of ensuring all staff have been trained and are cyber aware. However, I do want to take a look at that and make sure that we're doing it on a regular and ongoing basis. I think there are regular bits, but we need to look at the frequency of that. We do testing, so we do an element of of testing of our systems. But actually, one of the things we can also do more on is some of the phishing testing, where people start getting used to having phishing exercises and phishing emails, so that they can start differentiating between the two. The challenges on that is it can be quite difficult when you frequently got these emails that you've got to identify, but it does increase knowledge and understanding about what to look for and what not to look for. I think there's a difference between doing the training and theoretically understanding that and having that coming to you on a regular basis. So we have commissioned that, and we'll be improving on that one. I'll stop there and let Shashi talk about, or Jules talk about the TfL.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. So it's a very similar situation at TfL. So we have mandatory training in the same way, and then an ongoing campaign of reminders. So we try and identify different ways of engaging different groups around the organisation, and to make the subject as accessible as possible for different groups and different individuals. Everyone learns differently. It is a challenge. It can be seen as something that's perhaps frightening or very complicated or very technical. And what we try and do is make it clear that there's actually some fairly basic steps that everyone can undertake that will help protect themselves and the organisation, and might also help protect them in their personal lives as well. And we try and find a multitude of different ways of pushing that message to the organisation.
You've both talked about the challenges and the difficulties. So how are you overcoming those that cultural resistance that has, developed? You've got people from different ages. You've got people who, are IT aware and some who aren't. Are there particular groups that you're trying to focus on more than others? So how are you tackling those challenges that you've been talking about?
I don't think we're facing resistance. I don't think anyone has said, I don't want to do this. It's a question of awareness, and especially awareness of consequences of getting it wrong. So things like the cyber training, the mandatory cyber training that Jules has talked about, so that's, of course, everybody has to do it. Jules and his team run phishing campaigns, and we get results from that. That gives us a sense of where the weak points are and where training might need to be directed. And that's, of course, very important. People with elevated privileges, who are able to access more of the system, are required to go through more training and more awareness. So there are some technology things we can do in terms of segregating access and limiting access for those people who have not been through the training and may not be fully aware, cyber aware. But at the end of the day, you only need one weak point to get into the system, which is why this is not an easy exercise at all. But I don't think we face resistance in this. It's a question of where this lies in people's priorities against so many other things that they're required to do.
There was some research done in 2023, a study on gender analysis of security and privacy protection from King's College, and they specifically talked about women, that they were less likely to protect themselves online because current safety advice is not inclusive. So would you agree with that? Would that be something that the GLA and TfL are specifically looking at? In terms of a specific group to look at, or are you looking at other groups to make sure that you're inclusive and speaking to particular staff members that you've got concerns that you aren't reaching?
I'm not sure we've seen a gender bias here, to be honest. Right? We have a very diverse workforce, and I don't mean by things like ethnicity or gender. I think we have a very diverse workforce in their education levels, in their training in IT, in their general awareness about cybersecurity, and I think that's the challenge that we face. But I think the much bigger challenge is that there are people for whom IT has become a core part of their job, and there are people for whom IT is peripheral to what they do, at least in their perception, but they're using a lot of IT. So even though they may not be thinking about using IT, they're actually using IT. If you go to our stations, every member of station staff has an iPad. They're using it all the time. But if you ask them, do you think you're using IT to do your job? The answer may be very mixed. That's the challenge that we face of culture, about making everyone cyber aware. Because everybody is using IT, whether they recognize it or not.
And how are you ensuring that there aren't any gaps? So let's say there's a change of staff, there may be a team movement. Are you monitoring? Are you making sure that you are really making sure you're covering every member of staff and making sure that they do have the appropriate training?
So the mandatory training is You have to repeat it. So everyone is required to take the course when they join TfL, and then they have to do it again, or at least complete a knowledge check. I think it's every 18 months, and so if people have changed roles, if their use of technology has increased over that time, then they'll be required to go through it again. But at the same time, we also issue a number of other reminders through a variety of channels. So we post a lot of articles on our intranet site. We have articles in our staff magazine to try and reach as many different parts of the organisation as we can.
And my last question is based on what was said in the previous meeting, where we had a guest who said that there is this real burden on the need to deal with human error and the cultural barriers, and when they, and this is a a constant burden, because you're always going to have people hopefully working at TfL and GLA. Shouldn't there be other innovations that you should be looking at to mitigate the risks other than just human error? Is there other areas that you could be doing that just make it easier? Because at the end of the day, people want to get onto their computers, get the information easily. They don't want to keep on thinking about the process and the password and the steps that they have to take. Is there any innovations that you've looked into just to make it easier for people?
Well, the first thing, systems have to be resilient to human error, because expecting that there'll be 100% compliance with everything is never sustainable. So, for example, with phishing attacks, it is always the case that in a major phishing attack, somebody will click on the wrong links. We have other systems that protect us against people clicking on the wrong links. So there are multiple systems that are keeping us safe from attacks, and accepting the fact that there will be some human error. Now, ideally, if the human error is less, that would be great, but if we're not relying upon perfection in terms of human behavior. The more resilient we can make systems with multiple checks, the better it is. Things like password control and all that, we changed our policy on password changes. Going back many years, passwords used to be shorter, but you had to change it very often. The guidance on passwords has changed. You don't need to change passwords very frequently, but they're longer. They're more. There are more rules around what passwords need to be. So all of these things are being studied not just by us, but by the broader industry, and we aim to adopt the best practice that's being talked about in the industry as fast as we can.
And I was just going to say there's a difference between human error and also kind of some of the practices. So passwords are a really critical point, because actually if you've got the same password for all of your systems, that's a vulnerability. So it's again trying to, that's not necessarily then error, that's human behaviour. And the more that we can do to get people to be aware of what they can do to protect their systems, protect our systems, is the better position that we can be.
So the challenge is to change human behaviour. That's a big challenge. Good luck. Thank you.
Thanks. Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you. I'm just going to follow on from Assembly Member Bahari's questions. So, Jules, just going back to your point about you do a lot of promotion to obviously get across the key messages that you need to get across to staff across the board in TfL, and just going back to that point about inclusive language now, I think all of you have mentioned that clearly for lots of people, IT is a peripheral thing, and for others, accounts might be a peripheral thing. And so sometimes the language used by professionals in that area can seem like a completely different language to most people. How do you ensure that the language used in the documents that you release and the communications that you make are engaging at every level, and also in terms of sort of what is the general uptake? How many people are we finding are actually reading those articles?
There's a couple of different ways we try and address that. So the engagement team who report into me and responsible for cybersecurity awareness, they're not technologists by background, and so their role is to take what can be quite technical advice or quite complicated advice and turn that into something that can be expressed in plain language and is accessible and engaging. And then anything that we put out is also subject to review by our internal comms team, who are obviously specialists in making sure that the language that we use and the communication channels that we adopt are the right ones for any given message. And so we do think about it very carefully. It's always on our mind. We have a tone of voice for the team to try and make sure that not only perhaps the broader communications that we put out, so the sort of the more managed campaigns campaign, but also the email interaction. So if someone submits a phishing email, for example, the message that we go back to them with should be in the similar tone of voice. So clear and direct, but friendly and not alarming or kind of trying to apportion blame or anything along those lines. And so we always try and think about that very, very carefully. Clearly, we don't get it right in every case, and we always try and learn from the feedback that we get about our different forms of communication. The uptake, I would say, is good. So the training is mandatory, so that gets tracked at quite a senior level to make sure that that's been completed by all the different parts of the organisation. And then the broader parts of the campaign, we do get metrics on the number of clicks that we see on different articles and try and adjust according to those things. Clearly, we have a higher success rate with those who spend more time in front of computers, so back office staff obviously will spend more time with devices looking at these kinds of articles than someone on the front line, for example. And so in those cases, we try and put some effort in to go to them. And so we spend time out at stations and do stands at depots and that kind of thing to try and find a way of engaging the different communities at TfL.
Can I just add one? I think I would never wish a cyber incident on anyone. But one of the things that this incident has done is raise the awareness of cybersecurity across the business. And we forced a password reset on all accounts. But that also meant that my team that was doing the password resets went out to all operational sites. And that was direct face-to-face engagement where people were able to talk about cybersecurity, but also security in their own personal lives. And so, as I say, I would never wish a cyber incident on anyone, but some good things did come out of it.
Absolutely, Shashin, and I think, Deanne, your very powerful opening statement there in terms of where cybercrime is, and most people will probably more likely to fall victim to criminal activity through phishing domestically rather than hopefully at work, because obviously at work we've got those extra levels of firewalls and everything else that we only see the tip of the iceberg and a very small tip of that iceberg in terms of what might fall into our inboxes, for example. Deanne, you also talked about so I was going to ask about the sort of the level of training and were you satisfied with the level of training? You've already mentioned that you're looking to do more phishing test emails going forward. Is there anything else that perhaps TfL currently do that we're looking to employ across the full GLA family?
So actually we are using TfL's cyber training as part of our training, which is, so we're talking about the same training courses which have been tailored to be plain English and easily understood. I think it comes back to the Assembly Member Bakari's point, which is we need to test impact of that and make sure that the training that we're doing is actually being responded to. So this is where we're talking about doing some more testing to make sure that that impact is fully done, to determine whether or not we have got groups of individuals who may need more training or more support in terms of understanding where they need to defend themselves and what they need to look out for. So my answer to that is we can always do more. Whatever we do, and it is getting that balance of recognising, and I have to be honest, if we talked about it probably 6 months ago, this would not have been seen as the most priority training that individuals would have to do to join the organisation. Now, I think it's very high up on the list, and we are potentially really pushing that opportunity to say, whilst there is this awareness, we want to really do as much as we can to assess and review and refresh and do more.
Thank you. Now, clearly, I think you've all mentioned about the collective responsibility. We're only as strong as our weakest point. Everyone feels that sort of, I guess, that burden of responsibility on their shoulders in terms of when they're going through their emails at this heightened time. As part of the additional measures that Assembly Member Bahari talks about, so trying to stop things from getting into people's inboxes, prevention rather than cure, on this, the challenge with that, of course, is that you then limit the capability of what people are able to do on their devices, whether that's the Microsoft Surface or a handheld or what have you. That can be really challenging for an organisation as varied and diverse as ourselves, where we're doing everything from communications and marketing through to operating, one of the world's biggest metro systems, etc. How do you find that balance going forward?
Look, I think worth saying that systems have also become very sophisticated in filtering out these things. So, we have automated systems that stop a lot of phishing attacks. Some get through, but it's always worth remembering that most phishing attacks get stopped by automated systems long before they hit anyone. And they're not then filtering out useful emails as well, right? So, cyber criminals have become sophisticated, but so has the technology in tackling them. So, we use very sophisticated tools accordingly to try and get people to be able to do what they need to do without being at risk. What we're talking about here is the systems are not perfect, humans are not perfect, and that's where the risk is most prevalent, and that's what we're trying to control.
I think that's one of the greatest challenges about how do you manage information risk? How do you get the balance of being able to operate and do all of the things, look at the websites that you want to, have access to all of the information, speed up people's transactions and minimise that, but then protect us against cyber risk as well. And I think that's part of the role that we all have, and we need to work with our organisations about getting that balance right. And I think part of what we're all doing at the moment, the NCSE CAF, the cyber assessment framework, enables us just to reassess that risk appetite and look at where so all of the things that we're doing there are introducing risk, and we've got to get that balance right of managing risk, but being able to operate effectively as well.
And just finally from me, I guess, has that move to shared services made it more difficult to find that balance?
So I think that's for me, really. No, I think the shared services is not been affected. So every organisation is facing cyber attack at the moment. The move to shared services has not been relevant to that the cyber attack. That's something that happened separately. And I think it's really important that we do remember the problems that GLA was experiencing before, and there are reasons why we were looking at shared services. So we had a number of challenges, which is the reason that we went down that route. And these were flagged in previous oversight meetings. We've had problems with recruiting and retaining technically experienced staff. It's an increasingly complex infrastructure. There's a growth in demand for IT services, and a number of our systems were reaching the end of life. Those reasons haven't changed. There's still very valid reasons and good reasons that shared services are right and appropriate for us, and we've got a number of benefits to achieve from that. So no is the answer to that one.
Thanks, Ian. And I would have to say, and I'm sure you would accept, that there was a lot of contention about moving to both the HR and the IT shared services. And of course, there's going to be a feeling amongst a lot of people that we wouldn't be in the position we'd been in with our work day to day had we not moved to that shared service.
I'm fully aware, and I have seen sort of a lot of the correspondence on some of the challenges we have learnt. We are still learning with these moves. It's something that we're working on. And I am aware that with the shared services, there are some things we could have done better. There are some things that we're still closely working with TfL to make better. I have to say, my view on the cyber attack element is every organisation is at risk. So this did happen to our neighbours in TfL. We're all learning from that, but we're equally, this could have happened to GLA and not to TfL. It is something that has happened that is beyond their control, and is something that we all face as a risk.
Thanks.
If I may add, Chair. Shared services definitely increases the complexity of systems. There's no doubt about that. But I would ask you the opposite question, which is, had the GLA been subject to a cyber attack without the benefit of the dedicated cyber team and the dedicated technical teams that TfL has, what would the response have been? So shared services is adding complexity, and I would not deny that at all. My team complain about it all the time. But it's also bringing benefits of a broader team, a more competent team, a more resilient team to both sides of the fence.
Thanks. And it's an argument well made. I think the hypothetical if for that situation will always exist, though, after having experienced what a lot of Assembly members and staff have experienced with the change. Assembly Member Prince?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I think we've touched on quite a few of the issues that I was going to ask a question about, but I just want to put it in the broadest sense just to make sure we cover it off. Deanne, sorry. I had that right this morning. Deanne, you touched on the advice from the British Library about legacy. And I know you have touched on this as well, but just exactly how are the GLA dealing with legacy? You also touched on the older computers and equipment. How is it all going? How are we actually going to get on top of this, get ahead of it, rather than chasing it? The question's for both, really, but yeah.
Look, again, I think drawing comparisons between us and the British Library, or indeed other attacks that have happened, is always a bit challenging because each one is a bit different. What I would point out here, Assembly Member Prince, is that in our attack, our core services kept on running. The tube kept running, the buses kept running, all of our public transport kept running. And that is because of the very swift response that we enacted after the incident started. The systems that were disrupted are, of course, of concern, and I don't deny that at all, but it did not disrupt our core operations. Now, when you compare that with many other attacks that have happened, the British Library being one of them, I mean, their core operations were disrupted for a very long period. So not only were their core operations disrupted, the recovery took a very long time. And, I don't mean to point fingers at anyone, I mean, that's not my point at all. The issue here is, being prepared, being prepared in terms of putting detective controls, preventive controls, but also responsive controls is really, really important. Now, in our case, so we worked through that whole cycle. We had run a big cyber exercise with our exec in June last year. And the learnings from that cyber exercise were incredibly useful when the incident started, in terms of roles and responsibilities, in terms of the nature of response, in terms of who's got the decision-making powers at what times. These are all things that organizations need to be very well exercised in. It may sometimes appear that all we need to do is put a few firewalls up and life is fine. It has become far more sophisticated than that. The modern world of attackers is not relying upon basic controls like firewalls. They're relying upon very sophisticated methods of attack, and our response to that has to be equally sophisticated. So I think, to your question, how would we compare ourselves with the British Library? I think it's very difficult to draw that comparison. Different businesses, different types of attack, and all that. Our job is to keep our colleagues, our customers, and our operations safe. And despite the disruption, I have to say that our core operations kept on running.
Sorry, it may be the way I put it. The question was really more about how we're addressing the challenges of legacy. What programs have we got in place to try and... Because I assume that, especially with the merging of the two, or the coming together of the two, GLA and TfL, there's a lot of different bits of equipment, different protocols, which, as you've already indicated, make it difficult. How are we going to overcome that? How are we going to get that?
So, if I compare the GLA's IT estate with TfL's IT estate, I mean, there are challenges with both of them, and undeniably. The challenges with the GLA estate has been that the team is much smaller. It's not been looked after in the way it should have been looked after, which is one of the reasons for getting to the shared service. The challenge on the TfL side, some of those same challenges exist on the TfL side as well. But the bigger challenge on the TfL side is our technology estate is vast. It is absolutely enormous. It's one of the biggest IT estates that any organization runs in this country. And the challenges of investment are endemic. That's true of all public sector organizations, very true of us as well. In our case, we run legacy systems going back to many decades. Keeping them safe is a challenge. I mean, there's always a challenge of keeping legacy systems safe. We do retire legacy systems. We have been quite proactive in retiring legacy systems. In fact, even in my time, in the last 8 years as CTO, I've retired many, many legacy systems. but it's a constant battle because these legacy systems are very well entrenched in the way our operations work. And in many cases, removing them is not cheap or quick. So in the middle of all of our resourcing and funding challenges, finding the space to just remove legacy assets is very difficult. One of the things that's happened as a result of this incident is that although these legacy systems were not by any means responsible for aggravating the attack, because we've changed our security, many of these legacy systems simply cannot come back. So actually there's a bit of a forced cleanup going on right now.
So, what is your view of the threat from AI in cyber security? Does TfL GLA have the resources and expertise to keep up with developments in AI-related cyber attacks?
It's a very difficult question. There's been a lot written about it, but it's hard to see, I think, the direct impact at the moment because we're the kind of the world is going through whatever change that brings. There's a few theories about what the most likely impacts will be. So, for example, phishing attacks and other forms of essentially confidence tricks through electronic means, which is what phishing attack is, that they can be enhanced through AI, so they can be made to look more realistic. You can fake people's voices or people's written tone of voice, that kind of thing. I have to say, I don't think we've seen a huge amount of that, to be honest. So maybe it's easily spotted by the automated systems, or maybe it doesn't happen a great deal yet, and maybe it won't. There's other theories about how AI can be used to much more quickly look for weaknesses in software and in hardware, so to find vulnerabilities that can then be exploited by attackers to subvert systems or get around security controls. Again, I've read a lot about that potentially happening. It's not something I don't think that many organisations have experienced. So it's a very important area to watch. We have regular conversations with some of our partners around the impact of that. There's an awful lot being published about that kind of thing in the moment in the industry, as members will have noticed. Even in the mainstream media, it's received a lot of coverage. In terms of the direct applications and what it means for us, I think it's something we're still looking into.
Sashi, how about recruitment, getting people with the necessary skills? How difficult is that?
I think recruitment in the tech space is generally very difficult. We are in a very competitive recruitment market. London has become a very significant tech hub with lots of tech companies, very often Silicon Valley companies that are paying a lot of money for tech. So tech recruitment has been a challenge for a long time. The cybersecurity space in particular is very hot. A shortage of skills nationally is well recognized. And in many cases, people with really high quality skills will look to work for cybersecurity companies rather than for companies like us, for whom cybersecurity is a core activity, but we're not a cybersecurity company. I think under Jules's guidance, we have been able to build a very good team. Could it be even better? The answer is yes. It could be much better if we're able to pay people competitive salaries and give them. I think what attracts people to our organization is the culture that we have is a very important part of it. The quality of work that we're able to give people is a very big part of it. The complexity of our systems attracts people. Very few organizations have systems that are nearly as complex as our systems, and to many people that's it's a personal challenge. These are the factors that attract people to our organization, but the starting point is, can you compete on reward? And the answer is, unfortunately, not.
On that though, we do have other attractions that other businesses wouldn't have, being part of the local government family, such as pensions and also flexibility around working hours and so on, which other business may not be able to offer. But Diane, we've gone through a big process just recently putting up these job families, where we look at jobs and we're trying to bring people's jobs under a broader definition and bring people to being able to class people in a broader band. I think we're calling it job families. In relation to this issue and the difficulty in recruiting and the money that we may or may not have to pay, how does that work with the job families? How will that affect that?
So yeah, you're right about job families. It's something we're wanting to roll out across the GLA to.
Sorry, could you just sort of? I didn't do a very good job. Could you just explain for the people, the thousands of people watching, what we mean when we say job families?
So when we're talking about job families, we are talking about a way of benchmarking roles across similar roles across the organisation. So it is about looking at the families, the levels, the roles and responsibilities in a way that you can compare them with other similar roles across the entire organisation. Within the technical world, actually, those sort of job families already exist. So there's something called DDAT, which is the Data and Digital and Technology, which has already been established for many, many years. And there are a series of technical job families, is the best way to describe them, which have existed and are recognised, which we will be ensuring that our technical roles match against. So we want to make sure that we're not just looking at what job families we are doing across internally, but also that it stands up externally, because anybody in the technical space will be looking at the DDAT clusters as such, the DDAT job family, to make sure how they benchmark across with anything that's being offered. I think Shashi's point is absolutely right, though. In the technical world, it's quite difficult if you haven't got career development and progression. And whereas in TfL, they're a much larger organisation than we are, we're more limited with a smaller organisation and a smaller set of roles. So it is an increasing challenge to get the right technical expertise for people who want to develop and grow, and also maintain their technical expertise as well.
But would they now not have the opportunity of developing themselves or from, say, a GLA role into a TfL role?
They could, but there may be, so you're absolutely right, and the job families and the DDAT structure will enable people to benchmark, but that does mean that they're looking at roles with another organisation as such. So yes, it does, but because they will have more, TfL have more career development, and this is part of the rationale for IT shared services. Actually, you're bringing and pooling this series of experienced resources together.
You want to come in there, Shashi? No, thanks.
Thanks. Assembly. Okay. I would just come back then to the point. It seems quite shocking, the gap between obviously private sector security roles and public sector roles. I mean, clearly within the private sector, it's much easier to acknowledge the cost to a business of not paying for that role. How do we get public sector to that point where we can be paying people essentially to recognise the need of the reputation and protection that they're bringing to public sector organisations? How do we get there?
Well, I think we try, but I think support from the Assembly and others would be very helpful in that. I think there is a need to recognise that we are, in this area, we are not competing with the rest of the public sector. We are competing with a private sector that is very well funded and recognizes the financial risks and challenges around this much better. When you compare the cybersecurity expenditure that, for example, banks are undertaking, it's orders of magnitude different from what goes on in the public sector. And when you look at the financial data alone that we hold, we run one of the world's largest payment systems. Bigger than many banks, actually. So I think that recognition would be very helpful.
Thanks, Shashi. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. Maybe that might be one of our recommendations. So, good morning, everyone, and thank you. It's been incredibly interesting. I just want to pick up on the sort of some cyber governance and resilience points. So the government has set a target that all government organisations across the public sector will be resilient to known cyber vulnerabilities and attack methods no later than 2030. So my question is, first of all, in this area, does having a date even make sense? Presumably we should be as resilient as possible right now. And you're presumably always playing catch up. But are the TfL and the GLA on track to achieve that government target?
Thank you. That's a very involved question. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to take a bit of time to explain what we do. The first thing that I want to explain is what's the governance model behind cybersecurity in TfL. Deanne may want to add GLA into this, but I think this broadly fits the same model. So we have what we call a 3 layers of governance model, where the first line of defense is with the system owners. And so we have a defined system owner for every system across TfL, and it's their responsibility to make sure that the systems are secure. There's a second line of defense, which is providing advice, but also providing the central support for cybersecurity, which is what Jules and his team do. And there's a third line of defense, which is an audit function that, of course, applies not just to cybersecurity, but to many other functions in TfL. So that's the 3 layers of defense model, which is recognized by by many parties, including the NCSC, as best practice. So that is what we do. The second is that many of our systems, in fact, there are 22, I think now, fall under what's called the Networks and Information Systems Directive. And they get a very structured method of assessment and controls around them. Most systems have issues with complying with the NIST directive. Ours do as well, but there's a rectification plan that we've been on with all of these systems, and that continues. And the third is that the National Cybersecurity Center has something called the Common Assessment Framework, CAF, which we comply with as well. Now, in terms of a date, I mean, honestly, 2030 is 6 years away. So, we're not waiting for 2030. We want to be compliant now. The reality is that if you look through what is best practice, you will never find an organization that complies with everything. So this is, constantly staying on the treadmill to keep improving. And Deanne said earlier, this is an evolving game, and I echo that point, that it is an evolving game in which we are trying to stay ahead of the curve. We are very often behind the curve, but we're trying to stay, we're trying to move ahead with the curve. So I think, the government laying out an objective for 2030 is not unhelpful, but I think we aspire to do better than that.
Mm-hmm. So, what you describe staying on a treadmill. So would you say that cybersecurity is part of the overall organisational strategy for both the GLA and TfL? And if so, how does that work?
I'll speak for TfL, very much so. Cybersecurity is one of our top 10 risks on our corporate risk register. It is taken very seriously by our board and by our exec. And not just because of this incident, it was taken very seriously even before. And as I mentioned earlier, we ran a whole cybersecurity exercise with our entire exec about 18 months ago. So I think the challenge, to be fair, Assemblymember Russell, is it is not the only issue that the organization is facing. This is one of a plethora of issues that we face every day. And so it's always vying for attention alongside many other things. And those other things are not unimportant. Physical safety is just as important. Being able to run a day-to-day service is important. Being able to be friendly to our customers is important. So this is competing against many other things. What we can't have, and I think Jules has done an excellent job at this, is trying to raise the chimera of everything is everything is a cyber risk, and therefore nothing can happen. There has to be that balance between being able to let the organization run while being safe.
Yeah.
And I'd echo the seriousness with which cybersecurity is taken in the GLA as well. Colleagues on the Assembly members who sit on the Audit and Risk panel will be aware it's always been on the as one of our top risks. It's been made more overt now, just to highlight the controls and mitigations that we've got in that area.
Thank you. Now, Shashi, in your opening statement, you talked about a 2023 strategy refresh with an ongoing funded programme, which makes it sound like the cybersecurity strategy has money behind it to be able to do what it wants to do. Was that programme actually implemented by the time that the attack happened?
So that program is an ongoing program. It's a multi-year program with things that are supposed to be delivered in phases. A lot of that program got accelerated as a result of the incident, but there are many other things on that program that are yet to be delivered. But again, it's being on a curve throughout, and new things will keep emerging that will get added to that program as time goes on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning all. My colleagues have cheekily stolen parts of my question, but you can answer it however you see fit. If you feel like you've covered it, just say, I think we've covered that, Assembly Member Georgiou. The IT transition is ongoing, but can you set out what responsibility for the GLA cybersecurity currently lie with the GLA team in what is now held by TfL?
So we are part way through that transition. You'll be aware that our infrastructure had been already outsourced to TfL. That remains the case. We still have, I don't know how to describe it. We've separated something called we have severed some of the connections, and that means that we do need to reassess the IT shared services transition and we go through that. So at this point in time, we've just halted the progress of the transition to the IT shared services whilst we all get our systems back together after the cyber incident.
I'll just add that we are in this transition phase where responsibilities are changing, but that should not take away from the fact that if the GLA had a cyber issue, we will help. There is very active cooperation between the two sides, and it shouldn't be a case of what is contractually done here. And the nature of shared service and the nature of being part of the GLA family is that if we have capability that's necessary for the GLA, then we will of course step in and help.
Thank you for those responses. Now, if you whisper your responses in this part, contrary to what Assembly Member Prince says, no one's really watching this, so you can all speak your minds however you... Yeah. Honestly, Shashi, from your point, do you feel that the transition with the current IT team at the GLA has worked well? Probably where have there been a few, Deanne, you don't have to stare at him that intently. Do you think it's worked well? What would you have changed? Could things have moved quicker? How could we have done it better? I think in summary to the question.
Look, any program of this kind is challenging, and moving IT from one organization to another is challenging. This has not been without its challenges. There has been very active cooperation on both sides, which is what has helped through the transition. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. Things could always have been done differently and so on. But I think the important point here is that people are working together to do the right thing through what is not an easy transition. Being in this halfway house where some of the transition has happened and some is not is obviously not comfortable. Having an incident in the middle of that transition is obviously not helpful. So I think we understand all of those points, but the core objective remains. And I think you've heard enough today about especially aggregating the skills behind IT delivery. That is really critical.
Okay, thank you. That was a very diplomatic answer. I love it. Do organisational leadership and/or political leadership at the GLA and TfL give enough priority and challenge to the cybersecurity posture, and how has this developed over time? And I would ask that you possibly reflect on answering this, your answer about money being the primary issue, and now focusing more on the governance side of it and having the leadership, both in terms of officers and the political leadership that you need in this space.
So look, I think I have made the point about funding and resourcing, which remains a challenge, and that I think is something that has been pointed out acutely through the incident. But in terms of governance, I don't think we've come across a point where we've asked for something to happen and it's not happened. Right? The cyber security exercise that we ran with the exec was, something that Jules wanted to do. We've done it. And I think throughout the incident, the freedom of action that we had, Jules had, with the support of the entire organization, is a testament to the fact that the organization takes cybersecurity seriously, and it takes the competence of the people running it seriously. So thankfully, when we make points about cybersecurity, we're not being second-guessed all the time. We are being asked difficult questions, so we don't get away from scrutiny, but we're not being second-guessed, and I think that's really important.
If I can add to that as well. So I'm actually really pleased that the Assembly members have asked for these sessions. I think it's really important that you are aware of the risks. I suppose part of me will want to play that back afterwards to say, do you feel that you have enough understanding to be able to do, to be able to challenge and understand the risks and what we're doing to face that? So I think it goes right from the top all the way down to the organisation. This is the point Shashi's just talking about scrutiny. I guess it's never comfortable being on this side of the table, but on the other hand, it is really important that when there are incidents, we are all aware that what we've been able to do and to achieve in terms of this constant evolving challenge against cybercrime.
Thank you, and I think the irony of people like us asking these questions. There are 9 million Londoners, and there's 25 of us, and I don't think any of us have a particularly solid IT background, and so it is extremely helpful having these sessions as policymakers, because I think teasing out what both of you have said is that both the leadership of TfL and the GLA, both political or not, have been proactive, given you what you wanted, have been quite responsive. I think, is that fair? So given that, the flip side of it is, at times where there are budgetary constraints, or so we're told, are they as proactive when you go and say, look, this will make us more resilient? Now, Sashi, going back to what you said, there's no way we could have anticipated this attack or even stopped it with firewalls and whatever. But in terms of being proactive in combating cybersecurity threats before we have major attacks like this, is leadership as responsive as they have been when everything's gone wrong?
So I think I'm repeating what I've said earlier, that cybersecurity is and was taken seriously before the incident. It's taken seriously now, but was taken seriously before the incident. The challenge in any organization like TfL, or indeed public sector organizations, is that there are competing priorities, all of which are important. And so vying for funding or resourcing or indeed management time on cybersecurity is competing against all these other priorities as well. And I think we're very mindful of that, right? So we are very mindful that, when we start making cases about cybersecurity, that is against a whole series of other things that the organization needs to do. So I'm repeating myself, the point about funding and resourcing is a challenge, but attention and governance is not the challenge.
That's fine. I think what would be helpful, and I appreciate some of it may be confidential in terms of numbers, but effectively what I'm hearing is you're not getting the money that you want out of the lead. I'm not blaming the leadership, because, as you say, they've got competing priorities. But given that we've moved, under the mayoralty of Ken Livingstone and then Boris and then Sadiq Khan, the proliferation of the Oyster card contactless payments, digitising payment has made your job all that more important over successive years. So I think understanding what the kiosks for, the kiosks that you have in future would be helpful. And I appreciate you can't answer that in a public setting, but perhaps a confidential letter to Assembly members, so you've got lobbyists on your behalf for these sorts of things, because, ultimately there will be a proliferation of these sorts of attacks and could further cripple the system. So it's something that we're cognizant of. Thank you, Chair.
And just to pick up as well on Assembly members and deputy mayors and the mayor himself, I mean, does that present a particular challenge to you? Because differing levels of IT, no mandatory reason to do training or engage, and how do you deal with that challenge? And also an increased risk of targeting, right? So how do you deal with that separate challenge?
Well, all I would say, Chair, is that I think you should have the same cybersecurity training like everyone else, because you're using IT in the same way that everyone else is. And, we don't exempt our station staff from cybersecurity training, and I don't think why you should be exempt either.
I agree, but with staff, for example, you have that backstop of saying you have to complete your training when they go to your performance reviews, for example. Training is often something that most organisations, I presume we do as well, include. With Assembly members, mayors, the mayor, deputy mayor, you don't have that, and you also have the increased risk. How is there a way in which you evaluate making sure that's done, or?
I think this is where the culture comes in, and you can set the culture yourself.
Who sets the culture? Us. Okay. Assembly Member Bakari, did you want to come in still? No. Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Like Assembly Member Giorgio, some of my questions have already been answered, but I just to think more about collaboration and resources. I know we've talked, particularly you, Diane, mentioned working with other local government partners. Is there anything else that's any of you would like to comment on about how you work collaboratively with councils or other government bodies on cybersecurity?
Look, in terms of IT systems, there's not a huge amount in common between us and local authorities. TfL is a fairly different sort of beast. I would go back to the point that, there are information exchanges that we have, which includes local authorities. The work that the National Cybersecurity Centre do, which includes us, also includes local authorities to an extent, and our private partners. So we have private companies helping us with cybersecurity. They work with everyone, public, private, small, large, every kind of organization. So there's a lot of learning coming from them. There are many cyber risks that are common, but they're usually of the simpler variety. The things that we worry about the most are things that are more relevant to TfL because of the nature of the organization that we are. And we're not unique. I'm not trying to make the point that we're unique. There are other organizations that have large payment systems like us that are exposed to it, but that's not typically local authorities.
I have to be honest, so I'll need to come back to you on that one. I know we have a lot of collaborative work with local authorities. I couldn't honestly answer specifically on cyber, so I will need to come back to you on that point.
Because obviously, as we were saying earlier, all institutions like TfL, these big institutions, have a lot of data and have a lot of personal data, and so do local authorities as well. So it is obviously a common challenge. And finally, so collective procurement. Obviously, when you've got something like TfL that is such a big organisation, but other big organisations as well, does collective procurement make sense? I mean, is that a realistic option?
Well, to an extent, that's what is happening with the IT shared services, right? So it's not just collective procurement; the entire system's moving over, and then everything, including license costs and all that, will all be commonly negotiated. There is a procurement shared service between TfL and the GLA as well, and that helps in this regard as well. So collective procurement is definitely helpful because in some cases, the size that we are gets us volume discounts, which other parts of the GLA family can benefit from.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Diane, did you want to add something?
No, just to say, actually, I sit over the collaborative procurement, but who is with TfL, and exactly that point in terms of the IT shared services element, that has massive benefits for GLA.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're now going to go into a public discussion around the TfL cyber incident before moving to the private session. So I guess I just wanted to say, before we kind of get into that and that transition, was there anything on a more general basis you wanted to talk about? No? Okay, I'll pass over to Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you very much. Have you been able to rely on existing incident response and management plan and disaster recovery and business continuity plans in your response to the TfL cyber incident? I think actually you touched on this a bit earlier, really. Again, I think you've probably answered this. To what extent have they proved to be robust and helpful in the case of a real emergency? I think you did take us through that a bit earlier, to be honest.
So, we think about a cyber response all the time. This is something that we've considered very carefully over many, many years. By and large, when you look at how we reacted to the emergency, it was on the lines of our cyber response plan. Right? The reality is that any plan is, you can't script these things to the point of, a sequence of actions. But, we followed the broad principles behind our cyber response plans, the roles and responsibilities, including the roles and responsibilities between our technology team and the rest of the business, was as per what we had agreed. So there's a technology response that got done by the technology team. Of course, there's an impact on the entire operations that gets done by what we call our gold control. So I think in most respects, we followed the principles behind our cyber recovery plan, and the fact that it had been rehearsed was really important.
It's a bit like a fire drill, isn't it, really?
It is.
If you don't practice a fire drill, you're going to be in more trouble than if you do, but you can't practice for every eventuality. Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, though, or 0 to 10, in fact, 0 being absolute failure and 10 being perfect, how would you rate the GLA's response to the cyber attack?
Marking his own homework.
Did you want the GLA or TfL?
I would like GLA.
So just in terms of just a reminder that it was a TfL attack, not a GLA attack, although it did result in us looking at our incident management, our cyber incident plan, but in conjunction with TfL as well, and we were doing our own checks, both individually and collaboratively with TfL. We did have an incident plan. I think we responded very well in terms of how we did it. I won't say we were always perfect. I think we were learning as we were doing it. We've reviewed that incident plan, and we also have all our business continuity plans. Thankfully, we didn't have to invoke all of those. And we have exercises now to go through, update and retest those. 0 to 10. I would say it evolved. So where I think you start in terms of you may have been a 6 or 7, by the time you go further down the incident, I think things became much more slicker and organised and focused as you realised how well things had gone. My personal view was I think we responded probably, I don't know, maybe a 6 or a 7, but we moved up over a period of time and fairly swiftly.
Okay, thank you. Just out of 10, how do you think TfL went?
I'm not going to give you a score because, frankly, you're asking me
you're marking your own homework. So.
Yeah, you're asking me to judge my own homework, which I think is something that I'd make 2 points, Assembly Member Prince, I think that are relevant here. So our Commissioner, Andy Lord, is on record as saying that he was in charge of major incidents at British Airways for 12 years. He's on record saying this is the worst incident that he's had to manage in his life. Right? So I think that gives you a sense of the enormity of what we were facing. And I think one of the things that makes an incident of this kind different from other safety incidents is that the incident never ends. On day 1, day 2, day 3, even day 10, you don't know whether the incident is over or not. And that uncertainty makes it very difficult to manage because the situation is changing sort of almost continuously. But I would go back to the point that the NCA and the NCSC issued a public commendation, which is very, very rare. And, you can take whatever score you want out of 0 to 10 out of that. But it's incredibly rare for them to be issuing a public commendation for somebody's cyber response.
Can I just add to that? By the way, I am talking about marking my own homework when I gave you that. I do want to acknowledge that the teams that work for GLA were round the clock and were absolutely exceptional. So I don't want any criticism from me to be implied by that comment, because I can't fault the work that they did and how hard they work to support the GLA and all of our systems during that time. So I just wanted to flag that. That was about me, not anybody else.
No, that's fine, and I think we should all recognise the amount of time, effort, and good work that all our support staff did. Just moving on, this is for TfL. TfL only recently resumed processing applications for some Oyster photocards 2 months after the incident. People who were affected by that were asked to keep hold of their refund receipts. Have you any idea of the number of photocard customers who will require refunds and how much that will cost TfL?
Well, so first thing is, in terms of how much it'll cost, it should actually end up costing nothing, because if they were not meant to be paying a fare and they ended up paying a fare and we're refunding it, we're only refunding money that we should not have collected. So let's be clear that there is no sort of additional cost to TfL from refunds. And this is a principle that we've held very dearly through our lives, that we should collect the fares that are due, but not anything more than that. And if we've collected something more than that, we'll refund it. I stated these numbers at the beginning. There's about 50,000 cards that have been issued. There's quite a lot more to go. But the two big categories in that, children who've just turned 11 and need a zip card for the first time, or children who've turned 16 and need to move from an 11 to 15 to a 16, 17 zip card. Those are the two categories where we exempted them from paying any fares. So they're being waived through the buses, being waived through the train stations. So, thankfully, there's a mitigation that we put in place that allows them to travel without the fuss or without having to pay the fares. The biggest challenge that we had was with the 18-plus students who are allowed a 30% discount on their travel, and they were not able to get that, which is why we prioritized the 18-plus students when we reopened applications on the 31st of October. The next group were people who've just turned 60, who had to apply for a 60-plus zip card for the Oyster card for the first time. Now, thankfully, that's done by birthday, so it's only about the people who are turning 60 at that point. But there's a backlog there as well, and we will refund them. But to be clear, we will only be refunding them money that we should not have collected. So there's no net cost to TfL.
It's an interesting view. Okay. So, what about people who maybe weren't able to track their journeys? Is there any sort of leeway for them at all?
Well, I mean, if they provide us with an Oyster card or a contactless card number, which they've used for travel, we will be able to look up their journey history. I think, Assembly Member friends, you've known us for a long time. We will always try to do the right thing for the customer. And we're not people who will ask for, unnecessary documentary evidence to set customers right.
And how long do you think it will take for those refunds to be issued?
I mean, the focus right now is on getting all the zip cards out. The contact centers are open, refund applications are coming in, we are processing those. It will take a while. I can't give you a time estimate for that.
So. Sorry, you also said at the very beginning, actually, about the 5,000 customers who have potentially had their bank details accessed. And to be fair to you, it is a small percentage, unless you're one of the 5,000, of course. And then, of course, it's 100% you. Is there any other data that may have been compromised?
So this is all in the, this is something that we've been very public about right from the day that we discovered it. So there are approximately 5,000 customers whose bank sort code and account numbers were accessed. There's a much longer list of about 6 million people whose names and email addresses were accessed, but that is not deemed as a high-risk data because names and email addresses are, or pretty much everyone is out there in the public domain. Our investigations are still ongoing, and so we cannot be definitive about this, but we have so far not found any evidence that any of the data was accessed.
And do we know why those 5,000 bank details were compromised?
So, Assemblymember Prince, I think you're getting into the details of our response, which, if you don't mind, I would like to take into the private session.
Yeah, no, happy to do it. So I think I'll leave it there. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so that sounds like a perfect segue in. So I'll do the spiel and then we will be in a private session. So the next set of questions involved the discussion of items that would involve the likely disclosure of exempt information relating to the financial or business affairs of an individual, in this case Transport for London, and information relating to any action to be taken in connection with the prevention, investigation or prosecution of a crime. Can I ask the committee to agree that pursuant to Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the discussion of the remaining questions on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined at paragraphs 3 and 7 of that schedule, and it is considered that in all circumstances of the case the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Is that agreed? Thank you. The broadcast will now be stopped and the public meeting concluded as we move to the exempt session.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.